They told me I failed. I told them I found another way that didn't work. I never saw failure as the end. I saw it as feedback. That's why I kept going. When the lab exploded, when the tests collapsed, I didn't stop. I doubled down. The world remembers me for what I created, but they forget what I endured. Thousands of failures. Zero excuses. If you want to succeed, you must decide now. I will not quit. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind, and tell us, where are you watching from? Let me tell you something about failure that most people will never understand. They see it as an end. I see it as a beginning. When my laboratory burned to the ground in 1914, destroying years of work, most expected me to quit. Instead, I told my son, go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again. I was smiling. Do you know why? Because in that moment, watching my life's work turn to ash, I understood something profound. Failure is not your enemy, it's your teacher. And that night, I was getting one hell of a lesson. The next morning, while the embers were still warm, I began rebuilding. Not because I was extraordinary, but because I understood something that most people don't. Every failure carries within it the seeds of your next breakthrough. You just have to be willing to dig through the ashes to find them. People often ask, me, Mr. Edison, how did you handle failing 10,000 times before inventing the light bulb? I always correct them. I didn't fail 10,000 times. I successfully found 10,000 ways that didn't work. Each attempt taught me something new, showed me another path forward. While others saw dead ends, I saw elimination of possibilities, bringing me closer to what would actually work. Think about this. If you're afraid of failure, you're afraid of your greatest teacher. Would you run from a professor trying to hand you the answers? Would you hide from a map showing you the correct path? That's what failure does. It illuminates the way forward by showing you where not to step. But here's the real secret. Failure is only failure if you stop. Until then, it's research, it's development, it's the necessary preparation for success. When I was developing the phonograph, do you think it worked the first time? The 100th time? But each failure taught me something crucial about sound, about vibration, about the very nature of recording itself. I've noticed something interesting about success and failure. Success tends to make people complacent, comfortable, but failure makes you hungry. It makes you think. It forces you to question your assumptions and rebuild your approach from the ground up. In my laboratory, we celebrated our failures because each one meant we were one step closer to success. Let me give you a practical example. When I was working on the alkaline storage battery, I conducted over 50,000 experiments. 50,000. Most people would call that 49,899 failures and one success. But every single experiment taught me something valuable. Each failure eliminated one more way that wouldn't work, bringing me closer to the way that would. Here's what I want you to do. The next time you fail, and you will fail, if you're pushing yourself hard enough, I want you to smile. I want you to take out a notebook and write down everything you learned from that failure. What worked? What didn't? What surprised you? What assumptions were proven wrong? This isn't just record keeping. It's creating your personal roadmap to success. Remember this. The person who never failed never tried anything new. They never pushed beyond their comfort zone. They never discovered what they were truly capable of. Is that really the life you want to live? A life so careful, so cautious, that you never risk failure? I've failed more times than most people have even tried. And that's precisely why I succeeded where others didn't. I didn't just accept failure, I embraced it. I sought it out. Because I knew that each failure was bringing me closer to success. So let me ask you this. What are you afraid to fail at? What dream have you been holding back on because you're afraid it might not work? That fear isn't protecting you, it's imprisoning you. The only real failure is the failure to try, the failure to risk failure, the failure to push beyond what you already know you can do. Today, right now, I want you to make a decision. Will you join the ranks of those who dare to fail their way to success, or will you join the countless masses who fail by default because they never dared to try at all? The choice is yours. But remember, every moment you spend afraid of failure is a moment you could have spent learning from it. Let me tell you about the night I first successfully demonstrated the phonograph. I hadn't slept for days. My clothes were wrinkled, my hair disheveled. I probably looked like a madman. But in my mind, I was seeing something beautiful, the future of sound itself. They called it obsession. They said I was possessed. Even my own family worried about the hours I kept, the meals I skipped, the social engagements I declined. But here's what they didn't understand. When you're truly devoted to something greater than yourself, it's not work anymore. It's not even obsession. It's purpose. I remember nights in my Menlo Park laboratory, working until dawn, forgetting to eat, barely noticing as the sun set and rose again. My assistants would come and go in shifts, but I remained. Why? Because I couldn't stop thinking about the possibilities. Each experiment led to new questions. Each failure sparked new ideas. My mind wouldn't let me rest until I had explored every angle, tested every hypothesis. You see, what others call obsession, I call clarity of purpose. When you're truly committed to something, it fills your thoughts. It visits you in your dreams. It wakes you up in the middle of the night with new ideas. Most people run from this level of involvement. They call it unhealthy. They say you need balance. But let me ask you something. Did anyone ever change the world by being balanced? The light bulb wasn't invented during regular business hours. The phonograph wasn't perfected between 9 and 5. The greatest achievements in human history have come from people who were willing to become completely absorbed in their mission. Here's what I want you to understand about obsession. It's not about losing yourself. It's about finding yourself. When you're truly obsessed with something worthwhile, you're not escaping life. You're diving deeper into it. You're discovering what you're truly capable of. I used to keep a cot in my laboratory, not because I couldn't afford a proper bed, but because I couldn't bear to be away from my work. When an idea gripped me, I would work for days straight, sleeping only when my body absolutely demanded it. Was this extreme? Perhaps. But consider this. Everything you take for granted today, the light that illuminates your room, the recordings that fill your life with music, the movies that entertain you, these came from someone's obsession. But let me be clear, I'm not talking about blind fixation. I'm talking about purposeful devotion. There's a difference. Blind fixation is like a hamster wheel, lots of energy expended, but no forward progress. Purposeful devotion is like a locomotive. Powerful, directed, unstoppable. You need to understand the difference. When I worked on the light bulb, I wasn't just blindly trying things. Every experiment was purposeful. Every failure was analyzed. Every success was built upon. My obsession wasn't with the work itself. It was with the solution I knew was waiting to be discovered. Here's how you can tell if your obsession is healthy. Does it energize you? Does it make you want to learn more, do more? Be more? Does it contribute something meaningful to the world? If so, then embrace it. Don't let anyone tell you you're too focused, too dedicated, too obsessed. I've heard people say, Edison, you need to find balance in your life. But I always wondered, balance with what? With mediocrity? With complacency? With accepting the world as it is rather than working to make it better? No, thank you. I chose obsession. I chose purpose. Let me give you a practical way to harness your obsession. Every night before you go to bed, write down the problem you're trying to solve. Be specific. Then let your mind work on it while you sleep. Keep a notebook by your bed. Trust me, you'll need it. Some of my best ideas came to me in those moments between sleeping and waking, when my obsessed mind was still churning away at the problem. Your obsession is trying to tell you something. It's trying to show you what you're capable of, what you're meant to do. Don't silence it. Don't apologize for it. And most importantly, don't waste it on trivial things. Find something worthy of your obsession, a problem to solve, a creation to build, a legacy to leave. Remember this, at the end of your life, you won't regret the parties you missed or the social obligations you declined. You'll regret the times you let others talk you out of your obsessions. The times you chose balance over greatness. The times you silenced that voice inside you that was urging you to keep going, keep working, keep pushing forward. So I ask you, what are you obsessed with? What keeps you up at night? What makes you forget to eat, forget to sleep, forget that time? Is passing? That's not your weakness. That's your compass. Follow it. Let me tell you about the day I first proposed the idea of electric light to replace gaslighting. The laughter in that room was deafening. Edison's gone mad, they said. It can't be done, they insisted. Why waste time on impossible dreams, they asked. Do you know what I did? I thanked them for their input and went straight back to my laboratory. Here's a truth most people never learn. No one owes you their belief. Not your family, not your friends, not the experts in your field. The only person whose belief matters is you. And that's not just a motivational phrase. It's a practical reality I lived every day of my life. When I started working on the phonograph, people said I was trying to create magic. They called it Edison's foolishness. Even my own workers sometimes doubted we could capture sound and play it back at will. But their doubt didn't matter, because I wasn't working for their belief. I was working for my vision. You see, waiting for others to believe in you is like waiting for permission to succeed. And let me tell you something I learned early in life. Permission never comes. Success isn't granted. It's taken. It's seized by those who dare to believe in themselves when no one else will. I remember when I was a young telegraph operator, dreaming of inventions while other operators were content with their daily routines. They told me to be realistic, to accept my place. You're just a telegraph operator, they said. But in my mind, I was already an inventor. Their belief, or lack thereof, couldn't change that. Here's what most people don't understand about belief. It's not about convincing others. It's about convincing yourself so deeply that others' opinions become irrelevant. When I worked on the light bulb, conducting thousands of experiments, each failure strengthened my belief rather than weakening it. Why? Because I understood something crucial. Every failed experiment was proof that I was taking action, moving forward, getting closer to the solution. Let me give you a practical framework for building unshakable self-belief. First, stop seeking validation from others. When I was developing the stock ticker, I didn't poll the public about whether they thought it was possible. I didn't convene focus groups or seek expert opinions. I simply got to work. Second, document your progress. Every day, write down what you've done, what you've learned, what you've tried. This isn't just record keeping, it's building your case for self-belief. When doubt creeps in, you can look back at your journal and see the tangible progress you've made. Third, understand. That belief isn't static. It's something you actively build through action. Every morning in my laboratory, I didn't wait to feel confident before starting work. I started work, and confidence followed. Action precedes belief, not the other way around. Here's another crucial point. When people don't believe in your vision, it's often because they're viewing it through the lens of what's already been done. But true innovation, true progress, requires seeing beyond what exists. When I envisioned lighting up entire cities with electricity, most people couldn't grasp it because they had nothing to compare it to. Their disbelief wasn't a reflection of my vision's validity. It was a reflection of their limited perspective. I want you to understand something about the relationship between belief and reality. Reality always lags behind belief. When I believed in the possibility of recording sound, that belief existed before the physical phonograph. When I believed in the possibility of electric light, that belief existed before the first successful light bulb. Your belief must precede your achievement. But here's the caveat. Belief without action is delusion. I didn't just believe I could invent these things. I worked tirelessly to make them reality. Your belief must be coupled with relentless action. It must be tested in the laboratory of real-world experience. It must be refined through failure and strengthened through persistence. Remember this: the people who doubt you today will be the same people using your inventions tomorrow. The experts who dismiss your ideas will be the ones studying them in the future. But none of that matters if you don't first believe in yourself enough to do the work. So let me ask you, what dream are you holding back because others don't believe in it? What vision are you waiting to pursue until you get external validation? Stop waiting. The only belief you need is your own, and the only validation that matters is the results you create through your own efforts. Your belief is your responsibility, not your parents' responsibility, not your friends' responsibility, not society's responsibility. Yours. Own it, strengthen it, and most importantly, act on it. Because in the end, the world doesn't believe in dreams, it believes in results. And results only come from those who believed enough to take action before anyone else could see what they saw. Let me tell you about certainty, not the kind that comes from wishful thinking or blind faith, but the kind that's earned through relentless testing and verification. In my laboratory, we had one rule that stood above all others. We don't guess, we test. When I was developing the storage battery, I conducted over 50,000 experiments. People called it excessive. They said I was wasteful, obsessive, even mad. But here's what they didn't understand. Each experiment wasn't just a shot in the dark. It was a deliberate step toward certainty. You see, most people stop at good enough. They get something that works moderately well, and they call it done. But I learned early in my career that good enough is the enemy of greatness. When I was working on the light bulb filament, we tested thousands of materials. We had some that worked briefly, some that worked partially, but I didn't want partially, I didn't want briefly, I wanted certainty. Here's what most people don't understand about thorough work. It's not about perfectionism. It's about elimination of doubt. When I finally presented the light bulb to the world, I wasn't hoping it would work. I knew it would work. Why? Because I had eliminated every possibility of failure through methodical testing. Let me give you a practical framework for achieving this level of certainty in your own work. First, you need to understand that certainty is built, not found. It's constructed through layer upon layer of verified knowledge. When I was developing the phonograph, I didn't start by trying to record complex sounds. I started with simple vibrations, understanding each component of sound reproduction before moving forward. Second, you need to document everything. In my laboratory, we kept detailed records of every experiment, every test, every failure, and every success. This wasn't just for posterity, it was how we built certainty. When something worked, we knew exactly why it worked. When something failed, we knew exactly why it failed. Think about it this way. Would you rather have someone tell you they think a bridge is safe or show you the mathematical calculations and stress tests that prove it's safe? That's the difference between guesswork and certainty. One is based on hope, the other is based on verified knowledge. I remember spending weeks testing different materials for the light bulb filament. We tried platinum, then carbon, then dozens of other materials. Each test was meticulously recorded, each failure was analyzed, each success was verified through repeated testing. This wasn't just about finding what worked, it was about understanding why it worked. Here is another crucial point about certainty. It requires you to be brutally honest with yourself. When we were developing the kinetograph, my early prototypes showed promise. Many would have stopped there, declared victory, and rushed to market. But I knew that promise isn't the same as certainty. So we kept testing, kept refining, kept working, until we had something that wasn't just promising. It was certain. Let me share something about the relationship between time and certainty. They're directly connected. Most people want certainty. Quickly but real certainty takes time. It takes repeated testing. It takes facing and overcoming every possible point of failure. When I was working on the electric pen, we spent months testing different designs, different materials, different mechanisms. Each test built our certainty, piece by piece. But here's what you need to understand about this process. It's not about time spent, it's about knowledge gained. I've seen people spend years working on something without gaining certainty because they weren't working systematically. They were just repeating the same tests, hoping for different results. That's not testing. That's wishful thinking. In my laboratory, we had a saying, "We now know 1,000 ways not to build a light bulb." Each failed test wasn't just a disappointment. It was valuable data. It was one more piece of certainty about what wouldn't work, bringing us closer to what would. Think about your own work. Are you operating on assumptions or certainty? Are you hoping things will work, or do you know they'll work? The difference between these two states isn't luck or talent. It's thorough testing and verification. Here's a practical exercise I want you to try. Take whatever you're working on right now and list every assumption you're making about it, every single one. Then design a test for each assumption, not a thought experiment, a real practical test that will either verify or disprove that assumption. This is how you build certainty. Remember this, in a world full of people making claims and assumptions, the person who has done the work to achieve certainty has an unshakable advantage. They don't hope they're right, they know they're right. And that knowledge comes from only one place, thorough, systematic, relentless testing. So let me ask you, what are you assuming in your work right now? What haven't you tested? What haven't you verified? Your next breakthrough isn't waiting in your assumptions, it's waiting in your willingness to test everything until you know. Let me tell you about the day I conducted my 500th test on bamboo filaments for the light bulb. My assistants were tired. They couldn't understand why we needed to test another piece of bamboo when the previous 499 had failed. But I saw something they didn't. Each repetition wasn't just a repeat, it was a refinement. Here's what most people don't understand about boredom. It's not an enemy to be avoided. It's a barrier to be broken. When others get bored, they stop. When I get bored, I know I'm on the verge of a breakthrough. Why? Because breakthroughs often hide behind the wall of repetition that others aren't willing to climb. Think about this. Every major invention, every significant discovery required countless hours of repetitive work. The telephone wasn't invented in a flash of inspiration. It was built through thousands of repetitive tests. The phonograph wasn't created in a moment of genius. It emerged from endless hours of trying, adjusting, and trying again. But here's the secret about repetition that most people miss. It's not about doing the same thing over and over. It's about doing it better each time. When I was developing the stock ticker, each test taught me something new, even if the difference was microscopic. The repetition wasn't mindless, it was mindful. Let me give you a practical framework for mastering monotony. First, you need to understand that boredom is a signal, not a sentence. When you feel bored, it's your mind telling you to look deeper, to find the subtle variations, to notice what you've been missing. In my laboratory, we developed what I called the iteration mindset. Instead of seeing each repetition as the same task repeated, we saw it as a new opportunity to observe, to adjust, to improve. When we were testing different materials for phonograph recordings, each test wasn't just another test. It was another chance to notice something new about sound reproduction. Here's another crucial point about repetition. It builds expertise that can't be gained any other way. When we were developing the kinetograph, I spent countless hours watching the same test footage, analyzing every frame. Others would have gone mad with boredom. But through this repetition, I developed an understanding of motion pictures that couldn't have been gained through theory alone. Think about a master craftsman working with wood. To the untrained eye, they're just making the same cuts over and over. But each cut teaches them something about the grain, about the tool, about the technique. This is how mastery is built, not through variety, but through deep, focused repetition. Let me tell you about the power of boring details. When We were developing the alkaline storage battery. We spent years testing different combinations of materials. Each test required the same careful measurements, the same precise procedures, the same detailed documentation. It was mind-numbingly repetitive. But here's what I discovered. In that repetition, patterns emerged, insights surfaced, understanding deepened. Most people try to escape boredom. They seek variety, excitement, constant change. But true innovation often comes from the willingness to stay with something long after others would have quit from boredom. When I was working on the electric pen, we spent months testing different tip designs. Each test was virtually identical to the last. But it was in those subtle variations, those tiny adjustments, that the solution finally emerged. Here's what. You need to understand about the relationship between boredom and breakthrough. Breakthroughs often come not from doing different things, but from seeing different things in the same task. When we were developing the carbon transmitter for the telephone, we ran the same tests hundreds of times. But each time, we looked for something new, something we might have missed before. Let me give you a practical technique for maintaining focus during repetitive work. I call it the explorer's mindset. Instead of thinking of yourself as someone doing the same task again and again, think of yourself as an explorer mapping unknown territory. Each repetition is a chance to discover something new, even if it's just a deeper understanding of what you already know. Consider this. When you're truly focused on mastery, boredom becomes impossible. Why? Because you're not just repeating, you're refining. When I spent countless hours testing different filament materials, I wasn't bored because each test was teaching me something about electricity, about materials, about heat and light. Here's another secret about repetition. It builds confidence that can't be shaken. When you've done something thousands of times, when you've seen every possible variation, when you've encountered and solved every possible problem, you develop a level of certainty that no theoretical knowledge can match. Remember this, the person who masters the boring fundamentals has power over those who only chase excitement. When I finally succeeded in creating a practical light bulb, it wasn't because I had one brilliant idea. It was because I had the patience to test thousands of materials, to run thousands of experiments, to endure thousands of failures. So let me ask you, what task are you avoiding because it seems boring? What work are you neglecting because it feels repetitive? That boredom isn't your enemy, it's your opportunity. It's your chance to develop mastery while others quit. It's your path to discoveries that others will miss because they weren't willing to push through the monotony to reach the mastery. Let me tell you about the day my entire laboratory burned to the ground. Millions of dollars in equipment, years of research notes, countless prototypes, all reduced to ashes. The newspapers called it a tragedy. My competitors called it the end of Edison. But I saw something different in those flames. I saw data. You see, while others were focusing on what was lost, I was analyzing what could be learned. How did the fire spread? Which materials survived? What could we do differently in rebuilding? Every disaster carries within it valuable information if you know how to look for it. Here's what most people don't understand about discouragement. It's not a dead end. It's a data point. When I was working on the light bulb, each failed experiment wasn't just a disappointment. It was information. Each burned-out filament, each shattered bulb, each failed design told me something crucial about what wouldn't work, and by extension, what might. Think about this. Every time someone tells you something can't be done, they're actually giving you valuable data. They're telling you about the limits of their thinking, about the boundaries of conventional wisdom, about the obstacles that have stopped others. This isn't discouragement, it's intelligence gathering. When I was developing the phonograph, experts said it was impossible to capture sound and play it back. Instead of being discouraged, I wrote down their specific objections. Each impossible became a problem to solve. Each doubt became a challenge to overcome. Their discouragement became my roadmap. Let me give you a practical framework for converting. discouragement into useful data. First, you need to develop what I call analytical distance. When something goes wrong, when someone says no, when an experiment fails, don't react emotionally. Step back, observe, ask yourself, what exactly happened? What can I learn from this? What variables can I adjust? In my laboratory, we had a system for documenting failures. Every failed experiment was recorded in detail, the conditions, the materials, the results, and most importantly, our observations about what we learned. This wasn't just record keeping. It was turning discouragement into actionable intelligence. Here's another crucial point about handling setbacks. The bigger the failure, the more data it contains. When we were developing the storage battery, we had a series of spectacular failures. Batteries exploded, materials corroded, things went wrong in ways we hadn't even imagined possible. But each failure taught us something invaluable about chemical reactions, about material properties, about design flaws. Most people try to forget their failures as quickly as possible. They see them as embarrassments, as things to be hidden away. But I kept every failed light bulb filament, every burned-out component, every broken prototype. Why? Because each failure was a teacher showing us what didn't work and pointing us toward what might. Let me tell you about the power of systematic failure analysis. When we were working on the kinetograph, we didn't just note that something didn't work. We broke down exactly why it didn't work. Was it the speed of the film? The sensitivity of the materials? The mechanical design? Each failure became a series of specific data points that guided our next attempts. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between discouragement and progress. They're often the same thing viewed from different perspectives. When we were developing the electric pen, each failure felt like a step backward. But when we analyzed the data from those failures, we could see we were actually moving forward. We were eliminating possibilities, refining our understanding, getting closer to the solution. Consider this. If you're not being discouraged regularly, you're probably not pushing hard enough. Innovation happens at the edges of what's possible, and those edges are always surrounded by failure, by doubt, by discouragement. The key is not to avoid these things, but to mine them for data. Let me give you a practical technique for handling moments of intense discouragement. I call it the investigator's method. When something goes wrong, pretend you're a detective investigating a case. What evidence is present? What clues can you find in the failure? What patterns emerge when you compare this setback to previous ones? Remember this: the person who can convert discouragement into data will always have an advantage over those who simply suffer through it. When my factory faced production problems, when experiments failed, when prototypes broke down, didn't just push through the discouragement. I studied it. I analyzed it. I learned from it. Here's another secret about handling setbacks. They often contain information about not just what went wrong, but about what might go right. When we were developing the motion picture camera, each failure showed us not only what didn't work, but gave us clues about what might work better. The discouragement became direction. So let me ask you, what setback are you facing right now? What failure is discouraging you? Stop seeing it as an end point. Start seeing it as data. Take out a notebook right now and analyze it. What exactly went wrong? What can you learn from this? What variables can you change? What possibilities does this eliminate? What new directions does this suggest? Your next breakthrough is hidden in your current discouragement. But you'll only find it if you stop treating setbacks as enemies and start treating them as information. The data is there. You just have to be willing to look for it. Let me tell you about the real secret to innovation. It's not genius, it's not luck, and it's certainly not waiting for inspiration. It's work. Relentless, systematic, uncompromising work. When people called me a genius, I always corrected them. Genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. I wasn't being modest, I was being accurate. You see, while others were waiting for brilliant ideas to strike, I was in my laboratory, working. While they slept, I worked. While they socialized, I worked. While they complained about conditions, I worked. This wasn't just stubbornness, it was strategy. I understood something they didn't. Work ethic is the ultimate competitive advantage. Here's what most people don't understand about work. It's not just about putting in hours, it's about putting in intelligent hours. When I was developing the quadruplex telegraph, I didn't just work long hours, I worked focused hours. Each moment in the laboratory was dedicated to solving specific problems, testing specific hypotheses, moving closer to specific goals. Think about this. Everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. But how many people truly use those hours? When I started my career, I didn't have connections. I didn't have funding. I didn't have advanced education. But I had something more valuable. I had a willingness to outwork everyone else. Let me tell you about the power of accumulated effort. When we were developing the storage battery, we conducted over 50,000 experiments. That's not a typo. 50,000 experiments. Most people would consider that excessive. But here's what they don't understand. Each experiment built upon the last. Each hour of work added to our knowledge base. Each day brought us closer to our goal. In my laboratory, we had a saying, "There is no substitute for hard work." This wasn't just a motivational poster on the wall, it was our operating principle. When problems seemed insurmountable, we worked harder. When competitors gained ground, we worked longer. When resources were scarce, we worked smarter. Here's another crucial point about work ethic. It's not just about physical effort, it's about mental toughness. When we were developing the light bulb, the work wasn't physically demanding, but it required an incredible amount of mental endurance. The willingness to try one more combination, test one more material, run one more experiment when everyone else had given up. Most people try to avoid hard work. They look for shortcuts, quick fixes, easy solutions. But I discovered something interesting. The harder the work, the less competition you have. When I would work through the night, when I would spend weeks focused on a single problem, when I would repeat experiments thousands of times, I wasn't competing with anyone, because no one else was willing to work that hard. Let me give you a practical framework for developing an unbeatable work ethic. First, you need to understand that work ethic is a skill. It can be developed, strengthened, and refined. When I first started working 16-hour days, it was difficult, but over time, it became natural. The capacity for work grows with use. Consider this. Every major breakthrough in history has come from someone who was willing to put in the work that others wouldn't. The light bulb wasn't invented by someone working 9 to 5. The phonograph wasn't created by someone who quit when things got difficult. These innovations came from countless hours of focused, determined work. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between work and results. They're directly connected, but not always immediately. When I was working on the motion picture camera, we went months without visible progress. But the work we were doing, the experiments, the tests, the refinements, was accumulating. It was building toward a breakthrough. Let me tell you about the compound effect of consistent work. In my early days as an inventor, I would work on multiple projects simultaneously. Each hour spent on one project taught me something I could apply to another. Each problem solved gave me tools to solve other problems. The work wasn't just additive, it was multiplicative. Remember this, your work ethic is the one thing your competitors can't copy. They can copy your products, they can copy your methods, they can copy your strategies, but they can't copy your willingness to work harder and longer than anyone else. Here's another secret about work ethic. It creates its own motivation. When you work consistently, when you push through difficulties, when you maintain focus despite distractions, you build momentum. This momentum becomes self-sustaining. The work begins to pull you forward. So let me ask you, what are you willing to do that others aren't? How many hours are you willing to work when others have gone home? How many experiments are you willing to run when others have given up? Your work ethic isn't just about productivity, it's about possibility. It's about expanding what you're capable of achieving. The world is full of talented people who never achieve their potential because they're not willing to work hard enough. It's full of brilliant ideas that never become reality because no one was willing to put in the hours to develop them. Your work ethic is your weapon against mediocrity, against competition, against failure. Use it. Let me tell you about the longest winter of my career. It was during the development of the storage battery, and we had just experienced our 1,000th failure. Motivation? Gone. Enthusiasm? Depleted. Inspiration? Nowhere to be found. But you know what remained? Discipline. The habit of showing up, doing the work, and pushing forward, regardless of how I felt. Here's what most people don't understand about success. It's not built on motivation. It's built on discipline. Motivation is like a match. It burns bright, but dies quickly. Discipline is like a coal furnace. It burns steadily, consistently, reliably. When I was developing the light bulb, there were countless days when I didn't feel motivated. But I had something better than motivation. I had discipline. Think about this. If I had relied on motivation, none of my inventions would exist. The phonograph wasn't created on days when I felt inspired. The motion picture camera wasn't developed when I felt energetic. These innovations came from showing up day after day, especially on days when I didn't feel like it. Let me tell you about the power of routine. In my laboratory, we didn't wait for motivation to strike. We had a system, we had procedures, we had discipline. Every morning, whether we felt like it or not, we began our experiments. Every afternoon, whether we were seeing progress or not, we documented our results. Every evening, whether we were encouraged or discouraged, we planned the next day's work. Most people make the mistake of waiting to feel ready. They wait for motivation, for inspiration, for the perfect moment. But here's what I learned through thousands of experiments. The perfect moment never comes. The only moment that matters is now, and discipline is what gets you to use it. Here's another crucial point about discipline. It's not about forcing yourself to work. It's about removing the decision to work. When I was developing the telegraph improvements, I didn't wake up each morning and decide whether to work. The decision was already made. The only question was what specific tasks needed to be done. Let me give you a practical framework for building unshakable discipline. First, you need to understand that discipline isn't about willpower. It's about systems. In my laboratory, we had precise procedures for everything. These systems meant we didn't have to rely on how we felt. The work continued regardless of our emotional state. Consider this. Emotions are unreliable tools for success. Some days you'll feel motivated, others you won't. Some days you'll feel confident, others you won't. But discipline doesn't care about feelings. Discipline is about actions, not emotions. When we were working on the kinetograph, there were days when everything went wrong. The films jammed, the mechanisms failed, the results were disappointing. Motivation would have told us to take a break, to wait for better days. But discipline kept us going, kept us learning, kept us improving. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between discipline and progress. Progress isn't linear, but discipline must be. When I was developing the carbon transmitter, we had weeks without any visible progress. But our discipline, our consistent, methodical approach, meant we were gathering data, even when it seemed like nothing was happening. Let me tell you about the power of disciplined documentation. Every experiment, successful or not, was recorded. Every observation, significant or not, was noted. Every result, positive or negative, was analyzed. This wasn't because we felt motivated to do it. It was because our discipline required it. Remember this, the person who relies on motivation will always be at the mercy of their emotions. But the person who builds discipline becomes unstoppable. When I worked through the night, it wasn't because I felt particularly energetic or inspired. It was because I had built the discipline to work until the task was complete. Here's another secret about discipline. It compounds over time. Each day you follow your systems, each time you push through resistance, each moment You choose discipline over comfort. You're not just completing tasks, you're building strength. The discipline that seems difficult today becomes natural tomorrow. So let me ask you, what systems do you have in place? What procedures do you follow regardless of how you feel? What disciplines have you built that continue even when motivation fails? Because make no mistake, motivation will fail. It always does. But discipline, properly built and maintained, never fails. Let me give you a practical technique for building discipline. Start with one non-negotiable daily action. Something small, something specific, something you'll do regardless of how you feel. In my early days, it was analyzing one new material each morning. It didn't matter if I was tired, discouraged, or distracted. That one task got done. From that foundation, discipline grew. Here's what most people never learn about success. It's not about having more motivation than others. It's about having better systems, stronger habits, and unwavering discipline. When my competitors relied on inspiration, I relied on procedure. When they waited for motivation, I worked from discipline. Your motivation will fluctuate. Your energy will vary. Your enthusiasm will waver. But your discipline, that's entirely within your control. Build it, strengthen it, trust it. Because when everything else fails, and it will, discipline will keep you moving forward. Remember, the world doesn't care how you feel. Results don't care if you're motivated. Progress doesn't wait for inspiration. Only discipline, consistent, unwavering, systematic discipline can bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. So stop waiting to feel ready. Stop waiting for motivation. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Build your systems. Establish your procedures. Develop your discipline. Because in the end, discipline is the only reliable path to achievement. Let me tell you about the years before anyone knew my name, the countless nights in a lonely laboratory, the endless experiments that no one witnessed, the failures that no one recorded. These weren't my worst moments. They were my most valuable. Because in those silent hours when no one was watching, I built the foundation of everything that would come later. Here's what most people don't understand about success. It's built in private before it's ever recognized in public. When I first started working on the phonograph, no one was interested. No reporters came to document my progress. No investors lined up to fund my work. It was just me, my ideas, and the quiet determination to bring them to life. Think about this. Every major breakthrough begins in obscurity. The light bulb wasn't invented under the spotlight. The first successful tests weren't conducted before an audience. They happened in the quiet hours, in the solitude of focused work, when no one was watching and no one cared. Let me tell you about the power of private progress. In my early days, as a telegraph operator, I would practice for hours after my shift ended. No one paid me for this time. No one praised my dedication. No one even knew I was doing it. But in those private hours, I developed the skills and insights that would later revolutionize the field. Most people need constant validation. They need others to witness their efforts, to acknowledge their progress, to applaud their dedication. But here's what I learned through years of invention. The most important work happens when no one is looking. The crucial breakthroughs come in. Moments of solitary focus. Here's another crucial point about working in silence. It removes the temptation to seek premature validation. When we were developing the storage battery, we worked for years without announcing our progress. Why? Because true innovation needs space to develop, to fail, to evolve, without the pressure of public expectation. Let me give you a practical framework for embracing private work. First, you need to understand that obscurity is an advantage. When no one is watching, you're free to experiment, free to fail, free to try approaches that others might question. In my laboratory, our most innovative work was done before anyone knew what we were attempting. Consider this. The spotlight can be a distraction. When I became famous, everyone wanted to know about my next invention. They wanted updates, demonstrations, predictions. But real innovation doesn't perform on demand. It requires quiet spaces, private failures, silent victories. When we were working on motion pictures, we conducted thousands of experiments in complete privacy. No announcements, no demonstrations, no public updates. Why? Because we needed the freedom to fail without explanation, to succeed without celebration, to work without interruption. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between private work and public success. They're inversely related. The more you seek public validation early in the process, the less likely you are to achieve meaningful results. The quiet hours, the private struggles, the solitary experiments, these are where success is truly built. Let me tell you about the power of silent dedication. In my early workshops, I would often work through the night while the world slept. Those hours weren't just quiet, they were sacred. No interruptions, no distractions, no need to explain or justify my methods, just pure focused work. Remember this, the person who needs constant recognition will never do the deep, meaningful work that creates true innovation. When I was developing the electric pen, months would go by without any visible progress. No victories to celebrate. No milestones to announce. Just quiet, persistent work toward a distant goal. Here's another secret about working in obscurity. It builds internal validation. When you work without recognition, when you persist without praise, when you continue without confirmation, you develop an unshakable belief in your work that no external validation can match. So let me ask you, what are you willing to build? In silence, what work will you do when no one is watching? What progress will you make when no one is keeping score? Because these are the moments that define your potential. Let me give you a practical technique for embracing private work. Create what I call a shadow project, something you work on purely for the sake of development, with no intention of showing it to anyone until it's ready. In my laboratory, we always had experiments that we told no one about. These were often our most innovative projects. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The most important moments in your journey will likely be invisible to others. The crucial insights, the breakthrough realizations, the fundamental improvements, these often come in moments of solitary focus. Your best work will be done when no one is watching. Your most important progress will happen when no one is measuring. Your greatest innovations will emerge from hours that no one knows about. Remember, the world will gladly watch you succeed, but it won't watch you struggle. It will celebrate your victories, but won't witness your battles. The key is to be willing to do the work when there's no audience, no acclaim, no acknowledgement. Build in the quiet hours, work in the shadows, persist in privacy. Because true success isn't built under the spotlight, it's built in the darkness of dedicated, unwitnessed effort. And when you finally succeed, when your work finally emerges into the light, people will call it an overnight success. But you'll know the truth. It was built in countless nights when no one was watching. Let me tell you about the voice. You know the one I mean, the voice that whispers, "Give up," after every failure, that suggests maybe they're right after every criticism, that urges, "Take the easy way out," when the path gets difficult. I heard that voice too, during the thousands of failed light bulb experiments, during the countless telegraph improvements that didn't work, during every seeming dead end. But I learned something crucial. That voice isn't your conscience. It's your fear. Here's what most people don't understand about self-doubt. It's not a sign that you're on the wrong path. It's often a sign that you're pushing beyond your comfort zone. When I first proposed the idea of electric light replacing gas lighting, my inner voice screamed that I was attempting the impossible. But I wasn't hearing truth. I was hearing fear of the unknown. Think about this. Every significant achievement in history was accompanied by a chorus of inner doubt. You think I didn't question myself during those 10,000 failed attempts at the light bulb? You think I didn't have moments of uncertainty during the years of storage battery development? Of course I did, but I learned to recognize those doubts for what they were: resistance to change, fear of failure, reluctance to push beyond the known. Let me tell you about the power of productive denial. When that inner voice starts listing all the reasons why something won't work, I trained myself to respond with one simple question. But what if it does? When my mind would detail every possible failure scenario while working on the phonograph, I wouldn't argue with those thoughts. I'd simply redirect them toward solutions. Most people treat self-doubt as a signal to stop. They see it as their intuition protecting them from failure. But here's what I discovered through years of invention. Self-doubt is often a signal that you're on the verge of something important. It's your mind's natural resistance to the unknown, to the difficult, to the unprecedented. Here's another crucial point about handling inner resistance. You don't need to eliminate it. You need to work despite it. When we were developing the motion picture camera, there were days when every logical part of my mind insisted we were wasting our time. But I didn't need those thoughts to stop. I just needed them to stop controlling my actions. Let me give you a practical framework for handling self-doubt. First, understand that it's not personal, it's mechanical. Your mind is designed to keep you safe, to avoid risk, to stay within known territories. When you push beyond those boundaries, it responds with doubt. This isn't a flaw in your character, it's a feature of human psychology that needs to be managed. Consider this. The voice of doubt speaks loudest just before breakthroughs. When I was closest to a functioning light bulb filament, when the storage battery was nearly perfected, when the phonograph was almost operational, these were the moments when self-doubt reached its peak. Why? Because the mind fears change, even positive change. When we were working on the electric pen, there were moments when the whole project seemed foolish. The inner voice would list every reason why it wouldn't work, why we were wasting our time, why we should focus on something else. But I developed a simple response. Thank you for your concern. Now, back to work. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between doubt and determination. They're not enemies. They're dance partners. Doubt shows you where you need to strengthen your resolve. When I doubted whether the light bulb was possible, I didn't try to eliminate that doubt. I used it to fuel more rigorous experimentation. Let me tell you about the power of doubt documentation. In my laboratory, we kept what I called a doubt log, a record of every major doubt that arose during our projects. Not to validate these doubts, but to transform them into questions to be answered, problems to be solved, challenges to be met. Remember this, the person who never doubts never pushes their boundaries. The key isn't to be free of doubt, it's to build the capability to act in its presence. When I worked through the night on experiments, doubt was often my companion, but it wasn't my master. Here's another secret about handling self-doubt. It loses power through exposure. The more you drag your doubts into the light, the more you examine them objectively, the less control they have over your actions. When I doubted the possibility of recording sound, I didn't hide from that doubt. I turned it into a series of specific technical challenges to overcome. So let me ask you, what doubts are holding you back right now? What inner voice is telling you to quit, to settle, to stay safe? Don't try to silence that voice. That's wasted energy. Instead, learn to act despite it. Let me give you a practical technique for managing self-doubt. When that inner voice starts its negative narrative, grab a piece of paper. Write down exactly what it's saying. Then, next to each doubt, write, maybe. Let's find out. This simple act transforms paralyzing doubts into empirical questions. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The inner voice of doubt never fully goes away, even after success, even after proof, even after mastery. The key is not to wait for silence before taking action. Build while the voice complains. Create while it criticizes. Advance while it advises retreat. Your doubts are not your destiny. Your fears are not facts. Your inner resistance is not your reality. These are simply the natural responses of a mind encountering the unknown, facing the difficult, approaching the unprecedented. Remember, every time you continue despite doubt, every time you build despite uncertainty, every time you advance, Despite inner resistance, you're not just creating external results, you're building internal strength. You're developing the most crucial skill an innovator can possess, the ability to act in the face of uncertainty. The voice of doubt will always be there, but it doesn't get a vote. It doesn't get a veto. It doesn't get to decide what's possible. That power belongs to you. Let me tell you about the real nature of innovation. It's not about brilliant moments of inspiration. It's about the capacity to endure. When I worked on the storage battery, it wasn't a matter of days or weeks. It took years, over 50,000 experiments, countless late nights, endless iterations. The world remembers the success, but they forget the endurance it required. Here's what most people don't understand about significant achievements. They're not sprints, they're marathons, and not just any marathons. They're marathons where you can't see the finish line. When I started working on the light bulb, I didn't know if it would take 100 experiments or 10,000. I just knew I had to keep going until I found the answer. Think about this. Every major breakthrough in history came from someone who was willing to stay with a problem longer than anyone else thought reasonable. The phonograph wasn't invented in a burst of inspiration. It emerged from months of meticulous experimentation. The motion picture camera wasn't created in a flash of genius. It was built through years of persistent development. Let me tell you about the power of extended focus. In my laboratory, we would sometimes work for 72 hours straight when we were close to a breakthrough. Not because we were trying to prove something, but because we understood that some problems require unbroken concentration. Some challenges can only be solved through sustained, uninterrupted effort. Most people underestimate the time required. For meaningful innovation, they want quick results, immediate feedback, instant success. But here's what I learned through decades of invention. The most valuable breakthroughs often come after everyone else has given up, after the excitement has faded, after the crowd has gone home. Here's another crucial point about long-term achievement. You need to build your endurance gradually. When I first started pulling all-nighters in my laboratory, it was exhausting, but over time, my capacity for sustained work increased. My ability to maintain focus during long experiments improved. My endurance grew with use, like a muscle. Let me give you a practical framework for building long-term stamina. First, you need to understand that endurance isn't just physical. It's mental and emotional too. In my work, the physical demands were often minimal. But the mental demands? The emotional strain of repeated failure? The psychological weight of uncertainty? These required a different kind of endurance. Consider this. The person who can stay with a problem longer than anyone else has an unbeatable advantage. When we were developing the electric light system, many others were working on similar ideas, but they gave up when the challenges seemed too great, when the nights got too long, when the failures mounted too high. We kept going. When I was working on the quadruplex telegraph, there were weeks when progress seemed impossible. The technical challenges appeared insurmountable. But I had learned something valuable. Impossible usually just means no one has stayed with the problem long enough. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between time and achievement. They're not linearly related. Sometimes you can work on something for months with no visible progress, then make a breakthrough in a single night. But that breakthrough only comes because of the months of preparation that preceded it. Let me tell you about the power of what I call depth time. These are the hours when you're so deeply engaged with a problem that time seems to disappear. In my laboratory, we would sometimes start working in the evening and suddenly notice the sun rising. Not because we were trying to work long hours, but because we were so absorbed in the work that time became irrelevant. Remember this, the person who needs immediate results will never create anything of lasting value. Innovation operates on its own timeline. When I was developing the kinetograph, people would ask me when it would be ready. I always gave the same answer, it will be ready when it's right. Here's another secret about long-term work. You need to build support systems. In my laboratory, we had cots for resting, a kitchen for meals, everything we needed to sustain extended periods of work. This wasn't about working ourselves to exhaustion, it was about removing every barrier to sustained focus. So let me ask you, what are you willing to spend years on? What problem are you ready to stay with when everyone else has moved on? What challenge will you face night after night, failure after failure, until you find the solution? Let me give you a practical technique for building endurance. Start with what I call focus blocks, periods of uninterrupted work that gradually increase in length. Begin with 1 hour of completely focused work, then 2, then 4. Build your capacity for sustained attention like you would build physical strength, gradually, consistently, purposefully. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The biggest breakthroughs often come just past the point where most people quit. When I was developing the carbon microphone, we had a series of failures that would have convinced most people to abandon the project. But I had learned to recognize these moments of maximum frustration as signals that we might be close to a breakthrough. Your capacity for sustained effort is not fixed. It's trainable. Your ability to maintain focus through long periods of uncertainty is not set. It's expandable. Your endurance for the marathon of innovation is not limited. It's growable. Remember, the world is full of talented people who start things. It's full of brilliant people who have great ideas. But the ones who change the world are the ones who can stay with those ideas through the long nights, through the endless iterations, through the seemingly impossible challenges. The road is long, the nights are late, the challenges are endless. But so is your capacity for growth, for learning, for endurance. Build it, trust it, use it. Because in the end, it's not the sprinters who change the world, it's the marathoners. Let me tell you about the day someone called me just the light bulb guy. I had to laugh. By then, I had already revolutionized telegraphy, invented the phonograph, developed new methods for ore separation, and was working on motion pictures. The light bulb? That was just one constellation in my universe of innovations. But here's what most people didn't understand. Each invention, each field of study, each new domain of expertise made the others stronger. Here's what most people don't understand about mastery. It's not about becoming an expert in one narrow field. It's about building a network of interconnected competencies. When I was developing the phonograph, my knowledge of telegraphy was invaluable. When I was working on motion pictures, my understanding of photography and sound reproduction created unique insights. Every new skill amplified the others. Think about this. True innovation rarely comes from narrow specialization. It comes from the intersection of multiple domains of knowledge. The light bulb wasn't just about electricity. It required expertise in glass manufacturing, metallurgy, vacuum technology, and manufacturing processes. Each field of knowledge was a tool in my arsenal. Let me tell you about the power of compound learning. In my laboratory, we didn't just study electricity. We studied chemistry, mechanics, materials science, acoustics, optics, anything that might contribute to our understanding. Why? Because I had discovered something crucial. Breakthroughs often happen when knowledge from one field illuminates problems in another. Most people try to master one thing and stop there. They become experts in their narrow field and never venture beyond those boundaries. But here's what I learned through years of invention. The most valuable insights often come from outside your primary domain of expertise. Here's another crucial point about multiple masteries. They create unique advantages. When we were developing the kinetoscope, my experience with photography helped me understand image capture. My knowledge of mechanics guided the development of the movement mechanism. And my work with sound recording influenced how we thought about timing and synchronization. Let me give you a practical framework for building multiple competencies. First, master one domain completely. In my case, it was telegraphy. I learned everything there was to know about it. But I didn't stop there. I used that mastery as a foundation for learning other fields. Each new domain became easier to grasp because I had already developed the capacity for deep learning. Consider this. Every field of knowledge has principles that transfer to others. When I learned about electrical resistance in telegraph systems, it helped me understand resistance in light bulb filaments. When I studied sound waves for the phonograph, it gave me insights into vibration and mechanical movement that proved valuable in many other inventions. When we were working on the storage battery, my knowledge of chemistry was essential, but so was my understanding of manufacturing processes, material properties, and electrical systems. The solution didn't come from chemistry alone. It came from the synthesis of multiple fields of expertise. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between different domains of knowledge. They're not separate territories. They're interconnected landscapes. When I studied metallurgy for light bulb filaments, it wasn't just about metals. It was about heat, about electrical conductivity, about manufacturing processes, about cost efficiency. Let me tell you about the power of cross-pollination. In my laboratory, we would often solve problems in one field using principles from another. The solution to a mechanical challenge might come from understanding fluid dynamics. The answer to an electrical problem might emerge from chemical knowledge. This wasn't coincidence. It was the natural result of maintaining multiple domains of expertise. Remember this: the person who knows many fields will always have an advantage over the person who knows only one. When I was developing the electric pen, my knowledge of telegraphy, electrical systems, and mechanical design all contributed to the final invention. No single field of expertise would have been enough. Here's another secret about multiple masteries. They protect you from obsolescence. When one field changes, when one technology becomes outdated, you have other domains of expertise to draw upon. This isn't just about innovation, it's about resilience. So let me ask you, what fields of knowledge complement your primary expertise? What domains of study could create unique insights in your work? What areas of learning have you avoided because they seem unrelated to your main focus? Let me give you a practical technique for expanding your expertise. Start with what I call adjacent learning. Look at the fields that directly touch your primary domain of expertise. For me, telegraphy led naturally to electrical systems, which led to light and power distribution, which led to new questions about materials and manufacturing. Each step was connected to the last, but expanded my knowledge in new directions. Here's what most people never learn about innovation. The biggest breakthroughs often come from combining knowledge that others keep separate. When I brought together my understanding of sound, mechanics, and materials to create the phonograph, I wasn't just inventing a device, I was demonstrating the power of synthesized knowledge. Your potential for innovation isn't limited by your primary field of expertise, it's limited by your willingness to learn new domains. Your capacity for breakthrough isn't constrained by your current knowledge, it's constrained by your readiness to expand into new territories. Remember, mastery isn't about reaching a destination, it's about continuing the journey into new domains. Each field you study, each skill you develop, each domain you master becomes part of a greater whole. They combine, interact, and create possibilities that no single expertise could generate. The world doesn't need more specialists who know everything about one thing. It needs more synthesizers who can connect knowledge across domains, who can see patterns that others miss, who can bring together different fields to create something new. Don't be the light bulb guy. Be the person who can illuminate any challenge with knowledge drawn from multiple domains. Because in the end, it's not the depth of a single expertise that creates breakthrough innovations. It's the breadth of understanding across multiple fields. Let me tell you about the most important ledger in my laboratory. It wasn't our financial records, though those were necessary. It wasn't our patent documents, though those were valuable. It was our experiment log, a detailed record of every attempt, every failure, every small step forward. Why? Because I learned early that true progress isn't measured in public acclaim. It's measured in persistent effort. Here's what most people don't understand about success. The applause comes at the end, but the achievement is built in all the moments nobody sees. When I finally demonstrated a working light bulb, the newspapers called it a triumph. But the real triumph wasn't in that moment of success. It was in the thousands of failures that preceded it, each one carefully documented, each one moving us forward. Think about this. If you measure your progress by public recognition, you'll be disappointed most of the time. When we were developing the storage battery, we had years of work with nothing to show the public. No applause, no acclaim, no recognition. But in our laboratory logs, we could see the progress, experiment by experiment, failure by failure, insight by insight. Let me tell you about the power of private metrics. In my work, I developed what I call the effort index, a way of measuring progress not by results, but by the thoroughness of our attempts. How many variables had we tested? How many approaches had we tried? How many hypotheses had we eliminated? These were the real measures of progress. Most people are addicted to praise. They need constant validation, constant recognition, constant confirmation that they're on the right path. But here's what I discovered through years of invention. The most important validation comes from the work itself, from knowing you've explored every possibility, tested every option, pursued every lead. Here's another crucial point about measuring progress. External success is often disconnected from actual achievement. When we were working on the phonograph, there were months when we made crucial discoveries that no one else could appreciate. There were also times when minor improvements generated major public excitement. The public's reaction was never a reliable measure of our real progress. Let me give you a practical framework for measuring effort effectively. First, you need to understand that effort isn't just about hours worked. It's about the thoroughness of your exploration. In my laboratory, we didn't just count the number of experiments. We measured the comprehensiveness of our investigation. Had we examined every variable? Had we tested every combination? Had we documented every result? Consider this. The person who needs constant recognition will never do the deep, unglamorous work that creates real innovation. When I was developing the motion picture camera, there were countless hours spent testing different film materials, different shutter mechanisms, different lighting conditions. None of this work was exciting. None of it generated applause. But all of it was essential. When we were working on improving the telegraph, I developed a system for tracking what I called elimination progress, counting not just our successes, but the number of possibilities we had definitively ruled out. Why? Because eliminating what doesn't work is often as valuable as finding what does. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between effort and recognition. They rarely occur simultaneously. The effort comes first, often for extended periods, with no guarantee of recognition. The recognition, if it comes at all, arrives much later. If you need them to coincide, you'll likely quit before achieving anything significant. Let me tell you about the power of process metrics. In my laboratory, we measured everything: the number of experiments conducted, the variables tested, the materials examined, the hypotheses evaluated. These weren't vanity metrics. They were proof of thorough exploration. They told us not just what we had achieved, but how comprehensively we had searched for solutions. Remember this: the person who measures success by public acclaim will always be at the mercy of public opinion. But the person who measures success by the thoroughness of their effort becomes unstoppable. When I worked through the night on experiments, I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because my own standards demanded it. Here's another secret about measuring progress. The most important measurements are often the ones that would mean nothing to outsiders. In our laboratory logs, we tracked things like the number of filament materials tested, the variations in vacuum pressure attempted, the different glass compositions examined. To others, these might seem like meaningless details. To us, they were crucial indicators of progress. So let me ask you, what are you measuring in your work? Are you counting social media likes, or are you counting problems solved? Are you measuring public acclaim or are you measuring ground covered? Are you tracking external validation or are you tracking actual progress? Let me give you a practical technique for developing better success metrics. Create what I call an effort inventory, a detailed record of everything you've tried, everything you've tested, everything you've learned. This isn't about celebrating successes. It's about documenting thoroughness. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The most important scores are the ones you keep for yourself. When I was developing the electric light system, I kept detailed records of every experiment, every failure, every insight, not for posterity, not for publication, but for my own understanding of our progress. Your worth isn't measured in public acclaim. Your progress isn't measured in external validation. Your success isn't measured in popular recognition. These are all byproducts. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. The real measure of your achievement is in the thoroughness of your effort, the comprehensiveness of your exploration, the persistence of your pursuit. Remember, applause is fleeting, but the satisfaction of knowing you've done thorough work lasts forever. The world may or may not recognize your efforts today, but that's irrelevant to the quality and comprehensiveness of your work. Keep your own score. Maintain your own standards. Measure what matters, not what impresses. Because in the end, the only score that truly matters is the one that measures how thoroughly you've explored your possibilities, how persistently you've pursued your goals, how comprehensively you've covered your ground. Everything else is just noise. Let me tell you about the day I announced my plan to light up entire cities with electricity. The laughter was immediate. Dangerous fantasy, they said. Impossible dream, they declared. Edison's folly, they called it. I carefully wrote down each criticism, each mockery, each doubt, not because they hurt, but because each one highlighted another problem I needed to solve, another challenge I needed to overcome, another limitation I needed to break. Here's what most people don't understand about criticism. It's not your enemy, it's your roadmap. When I proposed the phonograph, experts said it was impossible to capture sound and play it back at will. They weren't just being negative. They were unknowingly listing the exact technical challenges I needed to address. Their mockery became my to-do list. Think about this. Every revolutionary idea in history was first met with ridicule. The telegraph, the telephone, electric light, all were dismissed as impossible dreams by the experts of their day. But here's what I learned. The more people laugh at your idea, the more potential it probably has. Their laughter isn't a warning, it's a signal that you're pushing beyond current limitations. Let me tell you about the power of strategic deafness. When we were developing the motion picture camera, critics said it was a wasteful pursuit, that no one would want to watch moving pictures. Instead of defending myself, I simply returned to my laboratory. Why argue with critics when you can prove them wrong through results? Most people try to avoid criticism. They adjust their goals, limit their ambitions, reduce their dreams to avoid being laughed at. But here's what I discovered through years of innovation. Criticism is often a compass pointing toward breakthrough opportunities. The things people say can't be done are exactly the things that need doing. Here's another crucial point about handling mockery. It often comes from those most invested in the status quo. When I proposed replacing gas lighting with electric bulbs, the strongest criticism came from those in the gas industry. Their mockery wasn't just skepticism, it was fear of change. Understanding this helped me see their criticism for what it was: resistance to innovation, not valid limitation. Let me give you a practical framework for handling criticism. First, you need to understand that not all criticism is equal. In my laboratory, we developed what I called criticism triage, separating technical critiques that highlighted real challenges from empty mockery that simply expressed doubt. The technical critiques became our engineering challenges. The empty mockery became our motivation. Consider this. The person who never faces criticism is probably not trying anything significant. When I was developing the storage battery, we faced constant skepticism. It can't be done, they said. It's a waste of time, they insisted. Each criticism was actually a hidden specification for success. They were telling me exactly what I needed to prove possible. When we were working on improving the telegraph, critics said our quadruplex system was technically impossible. Instead of becoming discouraged, I turned their specific objections into technical problems to solve. Their mockery didn't define our limitations, it defined our challenges. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between criticism and innovation. They're natural partners. Innovation means doing something new, something different, something that challenges existing assumptions. Of course, it will be met with skepticism. Of course, it will be met with mockery. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. Let me tell you about the power of what I call criticism conversion. In my work, I developed the habit of immediately translating mockery into technical challenges. When someone said, "It's impossible to make a light bulb that lasts," I heard, "We need to develop a more durable filament." When they said, "You can't record sound," I heard, "We need to create a more sensitive recording mechanism." Remember? The person who fears mockery will never create anything remarkable. When I demonstrated the first phonograph, people called it Edison's talking machine with derision. But their mockery couldn't change the fact that for the first time in human history, sound could be captured and replayed at will. Here's another secret about handling criticism. It often contains valuable market intelligence. When critics said electric light would never replace gas because it couldn't be subdivided effectively, they weren't just mocking, they were telling me exactly what problem I needed to solve to succeed in the market. So let me ask you, what criticism are you trying to avoid? What mockery has made you hesitate? What skepticism has caused you to doubt your path? Now look at each of these again, not as discouragement, but as a challenge list, a specification, document for success. Let me give you a practical technique for handling mockery. Create what I call a criticism conversion document. When someone mocks your idea, write down their specific criticism. Then, immediately translate it into a technical challenge or a problem to be solved. Their mockery just became your action plan. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The loudest critics often become the most convincing proof of your success. The same people who laughed at electric light eventually used it to illuminate their homes. The ones who mocked the phonograph eventually enjoyed recorded music. Their criticism didn't prevent progress. It helped define it. Your critics aren't your enemies. They're unknowing collaborators in your success. Their mockery isn't a burden. It's a blueprint. Their skepticism isn't a limitation. It's a list of problems to solve, challenges to overcome, boundaries to break. Remember, the world will always mock what it doesn't yet understand. It will always criticize what it hasn't yet experienced. It will always doubt what it hasn't yet seen. Your job isn't to avoid this mockery, it's to prove it wrong through results. Don't waste energy fighting critics. Use that energy to prove them wrong. Don't spend time defending against mockery. Spend it creating something so undeniable that the mockery becomes obviously foolish. Because in the end, the best response to criticism isn't argument, it's achievement. Let me tell you about December 9, 1914. I was 67 years old, and my laboratory complex, the heart of all my work, was burning to the ground. 10 years of notes, prototypes, and research were being consumed by flames. But as I watched the fire, something strange happened inside me. Instead of despair, I felt a kind of fierce excitement. Why? Because I understood something crucial. This wasn't just destruction. It was an opportunity to prove my resilience. Here's what most people don't understand about setbacks. They're not your enemy. They're your trainer. When I was developing the light bulb, each failed experiment wasn't just a disappointment. It was a sparring session, toughening me up, teaching me to take hits and keep moving forward. 10,000 failures didn't break me. They built me. Think about this. Every significant achievement in history was preceded by countless setbacks. The phonograph didn't work on the first try, or the 100th, or the 1,000th, But each failure, each setback, each moment of frustration was actually strengthening my resolve, deepening my understanding, preparing me for eventual success. Let me tell you about the power of what I call productive failure. In my laboratory, we didn't just experience setbacks, we studied them. When an experiment failed, when a prototype broke, when a design proved unworkable, we treated it like a boxer studying fight footage. What went wrong? Where were we weak? How could we be stronger next time? Most people try to avoid setbacks. They play it safe, stick to the known, retreat at the first sign of trouble. But here's what I discovered through years of innovation. Setbacks are where your real strength is built. Just as a muscle needs resistance to grow, your capability needs resistance to develop. Here's another crucial point about handling setbacks. They're not random. They're revealing. When we were developing the storage battery, each failure showed us something about material properties, about chemical reactions, about design flaws. The setbacks weren't just obstacles, they were teachers. Let me give you a practical framework for turning setbacks into strength. First, you need to understand that resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop through repeated exposure to challenges. In my work, I deliberately took on problems that others thought impossible. Why? Because I knew the attempt would either result in success or make me stronger through failure. Consider this: the person who never faces setbacks never develops true strength. When I was working on the electric pen, we had failure after failure. But each setback forced us to think differently, to try new approaches, to develop new capabilities. The setbacks weren't stopping us, they were training us. When we were testing different filaments for the light bulb, each failure was actually a form of conditioning. Every burned-out filament, every shattered bulb, every failed design was toughening our resolve, sharpening our focus, deepening our commitment to finding a solution. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between setbacks and success. They're not opposites, they're partners. Every major breakthrough I achieved came after a series of setbacks, but it wasn't just about persisting through them. It was about getting stronger because of them. Let me tell you about the power of what I call setback training. In my laboratory, we had a system for analyzing failures. We didn't just note that something didn't work. We studied exactly how it failed, what we learned from the failure, and how it made us better prepared for the next attempt. Each setback became a lesson in our training program. Remember this: the person who fears setbacks will never achieve anything significant. When I was developing the motion picture camera, we had countless technical failures, but each one taught us something vital about optics, about mechanics, about timing. The setbacks weren't derailing us, they were educating us. Here's another secret about handling setbacks: they often reveal opportunities that success would have hidden. When my laboratory burned down, it forced us to rethink everything: our organization, our methods, our priorities. The setback didn't just challenge us, it transformed us. So let me ask you, what setback are you facing right now? What failure has knocked you down? What obstacle seems insurmountable? Now look at it again, not as your opponent, but as your trainer. What is it teaching you? How is it making you stronger? What capabilities is it forcing you to develop? Let me give you a practical technique for handling setbacks. Create what I call a strength inventory. After each failure, each setback, each disappointing result, write down exactly what it taught you, what skills it forced you to develop, what capabilities it helped you discover. The setback just became your personal development program. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The path to success isn't about avoiding setbacks, it's about getting stronger through them. When I faced technical challenges, that seemed impossible. When experiments failed that should have worked, when prototypes broke that should have held, each moment was actually an opportunity to develop greater capability. Your setbacks aren't your enemies, they're your sparring partners. Your failures aren't your defeats, they're your training grounds. Your obstacles aren't your limitations, they're your strength-building opportunities. Remember, every time You get knocked down and get back up every time you fail and try again, every time you face a setback and push forward. You're not just persisting, you're getting stronger. The setback isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. Because in the end, it's not about how many times you get knocked down, it's about how much stronger you become in the process of getting back up. The world doesn't just need people who can succeed. It needs people who can fail, learn, adapt, and come back stronger. Your next setback isn't your enemy. It's your next training session. Don't just endure it. Use it. Don't just survive it. Grow from it. Don't just get past it. Get stronger through it, because the strength you develop through today's setbacks is exactly what you'll need for tomorrow's breakthroughs. Let me tell you about the darkest days of developing the light bulb. We had tried thousands of materials for the filament. Nothing worked. The press was mocking our efforts. Investors were getting nervous. Everyone wanted to know when we would succeed. But I couldn't tell them because I didn't know. What I did know with absolute certainty was that our process would eventually yield the answer. My faith wasn't in any particular experiment. It was in the relentless process of experimentation itself. Here's what most people don't understand about innovation. It's not about believing in specific outcomes. It's about believing in your methodology. When I was developing the phonograph, I couldn't know exactly when we would succeed, but I knew our systematic approach to testing, documenting, and refining would eventually reveal the solution. Think about this. Every major breakthrough in history came from someone who trusted their process more than they needed immediate results. The storage battery took years to develop. If I had been fixated on quick outcomes, rather than trusting in thorough experimentation, we would have given up long before success. Let me tell you about the power of process faith. In my laboratory, we developed what I called methodological confidence, absolute trust in our systematic approach to problem solving. When experiments failed, when prototypes broke, when progress seemed impossible, this faith in our process kept us moving forward. Most people are obsessed with outcomes. They need to know when they'll succeed, how they'll succeed, what success will look like. But here's what I learned through years of invention. The more revolutionary the innovation, the less you can predict its specific path to success. What you can trust is your process of discovery. Here's another crucial point about trusting the process. It frees you from the tyranny of immediate results. When we were working on motion pictures, we couldn't know exactly what form the finals invention would take. But we could trust that each experiment, each test, each failure was moving us closer to understanding. Let me give you a practical framework for building process faith. First, you need to understand that innovation isn't a straight line. It's a systematic exploration of possibilities. In my work, we never knew which experiment would yield success, but we knew that methodically testing every possibility would eventually reveal the answer. Consider this. The person who needs guaranteed outcomes will never attempt anything truly innovative. When I started working on electric light, I couldn't guarantee success to anyone, not my investors, not my team, not even myself. What I could guarantee was that our process would systematically eliminate what didn't work until we found what did. When we were developing the quadruplex telegraph, there were months when we seemed to make no progress at all. But I had learned something vital. Lack of visible progress doesn't mean lack of movement. Our process was continuously eliminating possibilities, refining our understanding, moving us closer to breakthrough. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between process and outcome. The outcome is uncertain, but the process is within your control. When I was working on improving sound recording, I couldn't control when we would achieve perfect fidelity, but I could control the thoroughness of our testing, the rigor of our documentation, the systematic nature of our exploration. Let me tell you about the power of what I call process momentum. In my laboratory, we found that maintaining faith in our methodology created its own kind of progress. Each experiment built upon the last. Each failure informed the next attempt. Each setback refined our approach. The process itself became a form of progress. Remember this: the person who needs certainty of outcome will always be limited by their fear of uncertainty. When I was developing the electric pen, we had no guarantee of success. What we had was a proven process for systematic innovation, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Here's another secret about trusting the process. It actually accelerates progress. When you're not constantly anxious about immediate results, when you're not paralyzed by the need for a quick success, you can focus entirely on thorough exploration. The process becomes more efficient because you're not fighting it. So let me ask you, what outcome are you too focused on right now? What result are you trying to force? What timeline are you trying to control? Now shift your focus to your process. Is it thorough? Is it systematic? Is it reliable? That's where your faith belongs. Let me give you a practical technique for developing process faith. Create what I call a process map, a detailed documentation of your methodology. When uncertainty strikes, when doubt creeps in, when progress seems impossible, you can return to this map. The outcome may be uncertain, but your next step is always clear. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. The biggest breakthroughs come from trusting the process more than needing the outcome. When I was developing the carbon transmitter, we had no idea how long it would take, but we trusted that each experiment, each test, each failure was necessary for success. Your job isn't to know exactly how or when you'll succeed. Your job is to build and trust a process that makes success inevitable through systematic exploration. Your confidence shouldn't be in specific outcomes. It should be in your methodology of discovery. Remember, the world is full of people waiting for guaranteed outcomes. It's full of people needing certainty before they'll act, requiring assurance before they'll commit. But innovation doesn't work that way. The only certainty is in the process, in the systematic exploration of possibilities, in the methodical elimination of what doesn't work. Trust your process, not because it guarantees immediate success, but because it guarantees continuous progress. Not because it eliminates uncertainty, but because it gives you a way to move forward despite uncertainty. Not because it promises specific outcomes, but because it ensures that every outcome, success or failure, moves you closer to your goal. Because in the end, it's not about believing you'll succeed, it's about believing in your process of discovery. The outcome may be uncertain, but the method is unwavering. Trust that. Let me tell you about the nights I spent in my laboratory when my body screamed for rest, when my mind begged for break, when every rational thought suggested giving up. What kept me going wasn't willpower, it was purpose. I could see cities, illuminated by electric light, homes filled with recorded music, the world transformed by innovation. That vision wasn't just a dream. It was a purpose so compelling that temporary discomfort became irrelevant. Here's what most people don't understand about perseverance. It's not about ignoring pain. It's about being driven by something more powerful than pain. When I was developing the light bulb, there were countless moments of frustration, exhaustion, and doubt. But my purpose wasn't just to create light. It was to transform human existence. That purpose made every setback bearable. Think about this. Every major innovation in history came from someone whose purpose was stronger than their pain. The phonograph wasn't created by someone who quit when they got tired. The motion picture camera wasn't developed by someone who stopped when things got difficult. These innovations came from people whose vision of what could be outweighed the discomfort of what was. Let me tell you about the power of purposeful pain. In my laboratory, we developed what I called meaningful discomfort, the understanding that our temporary struggles were creating permanent progress. When experiments failed, when prototypes broke, when nights grew long, we reminded ourselves that each moment of difficulty was serving a greater purpose. Most people try to avoid discomfort. They seek the easy path, the comfortable route, the pain-free option. But here's what I discovered through years of innovation. The most meaningful achievements often require embracing discomfort in service of a greater purpose. Here's another crucial point about purpose and pain. They're not enemies, they're collaborators. When we were working on the storage battery, each setback, each failure, each moment of frustration wasn't just suffering. It was our purpose refining itself, showing us what needed to be overcome. Let me give you a practical framework for using purpose to overcome pain. First, you need to understand that purpose isn't just about having a goal. It's about having a vision so compelling that it makes current difficulties feel temporary and worthwhile. In my work, we didn't just aim to create inventions, we aimed to transform human experience. Consider this: the person who seeks to avoid all pain will never achieve anything significant. When I was working on improving the telegraph, there were countless hours of tedious experimentation, numerous technical failures, endless frustrating setbacks. But our purpose, to revolutionize human communication, made every difficulty worthwhile. When we were developing the electric light system, there were moments when the technical challenges seemed insurmountable. But I had learned something vital. When your purpose is clear enough, obstacles stop looking like barriers and start looking like stepping stones. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between purpose and perseverance. They're directly connected. The stronger your purpose, the more pain you can endure. When I worked through the night, when I pushed through failure after failure, when I continued despite criticism and doubt, it wasn't because I didn't feel the difficulty. It was because my purpose was stronger than my discomfort. Let me tell you about the power of what I call purpose-driven persistence. In my laboratory, we found that the teams who deeply understood and believed in the purpose of their work could endure far more setbacks, work through far more failures, and maintain focus through far more difficulties than those who were just doing a job. Remember this: the person who works only for results will always be at the mercy of temporary setbacks. But the person who works for a purpose becomes unstoppable. When I was developing the kinetograph, each technical challenge, each failed prototype, each moment of frustration was transformed by our greater purpose, to capture and share human experience in a completely new way. Here's another secret about purpose: it transforms the meaning of pain. When we were working on sound recording, every failed experiment, every technical setback, every moment of frustration wasn't just difficulty. It was part of the process of creating something that would change how humans experience music and voice forever. So let me ask you, what pain are you trying to avoid right now? What discomfort is holding you back? What difficulties make you want to quit? Now, connect these challenges to your deeper purpose. How is each difficulty serving your greater goal? How is each setback helping you create something meaningful? Let me give you a practical technique for maintaining purpose through pain. Create what I call a purpose map, a clear documentation of how your current struggles connect to your larger vision. When pain strikes, when doubt creeps in, when difficulties mount, you can return to this map and remember why the temporary discomfort is worthwhile. Here's what most people never learn about achievement. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about having a purpose worth enduring pain for. When I faced technical challenges that seemed impossible, when experiments failed that should have worked, when progress seemed permanently stalled, it wasn't optimism that kept me going. It was purpose. Your discomfort is temporary. Your impact can be permanent. Your pain is momentary. Your purpose can be eternal. Your struggles are current. Your contribution can be lasting. Remember, the world isn't changed by people who avoid difficulty. It's changed by people whose purpose is greater than their pain. Every moment of discomfort you endure in service of a meaningful purpose isn't just suffering, it's progress. Every difficulty you face isn't just a challenge. It's a step toward creating something significant. Your purpose isn't just a goal, it's your power source. It's not just a destination, it's your fuel. It's not just what you're working toward, it's what carries you through the work itself. Because in the end, it's not about whether something is difficult, it's about whether it's worth it. And when your purpose is clear enough, strong enough, meaningful enough, there's no pain too great, no challenge too difficult, no obstacle too daunting to overcome in its service. Let me tell you about something deeper than motivation, more powerful than discipline, more lasting than determination. I call it the spiritual engine, that internal fire that makes rest impossible when there's work to be done, that makes satisfaction impossible when there's progress to be made, that makes complacency impossible when there's innovation to be created. This isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving to yourself what's possible. Here's what most people don't understand about lasting achievement. It's not driven by external goals. It's powered by an internal flame that never stops seeking, never stops questioning, never stops pushing for what's next. When I finished the phonograph, people expected me to rest, to celebrate, to bask in the achievement. Instead, I immediately began improving it. Why? Because the fire inside demanded it. Think about this. Every major innovator in history wasn't just driven by specific goals. They were driven by an insatiable internal fire that made stopping impossible. The light bulb wasn't my final achievement. It was just another expression of this endless drive to create, to improve, to push beyond what exists. Let me tell you about the power of perpetual discontent. In my laboratory, we developed what I called constructive restlessness, the inability to be satisfied with current achievements, the constant push to improve, to refine, to revolutionize. When we succeeded at something, our first question wasn't, what next? But how can this be better? Most people let their fire die after achieving their goals. They reach their target, and the flame flickers out. But here's what I discovered. Through years of innovation, real achievement isn't about reaching destinations. It's about maintaining that internal drive that makes stopping impossible. Here's another crucial point about the internal fire. It's not about competition with others. It's about the endless pursuit of possibility. When we were working on electric light, I wasn't trying to beat competitors. I was trying to expand what was possible. The fire wasn't fueled by rivalry. It was fueled by vision. Let me give you a practical framework for maintaining your internal fire. First, you need to understand that this isn't about motivation. It's about identity. In my work, I didn't need to push myself to innovate. I needed to hold myself back from working too long, too hard, too intensely. The fire wasn't something I had to create. It was something I had to channel. Consider this. The person who needs external motivation will always be limited by external circumstances. But the person driven by internal fire becomes unstoppable. When I worked through the night, when I pursued seemingly impossible goals, when I refused to accept current limitations, it wasn't because someone was pushing me, it was because something inside me made stopping impossible. When we were developing the motion picture camera, there were countless moments when rational thinking would have suggested taking a break, slowing down, being satisfied with partial progress. But the internal fire doesn't respond to rational arguments, it responds to possibilities, to potential, to the vision of what could be. Here's what you need to understand about the relationship between internal fire and external achievement. They're inseparable. The greater your internal flame, the more impossible it becomes to settle for mediocrity. When I looked at any invention, any solution, any achievement, I didn't see completion. I saw opportunities for improvement. Let me tell you about the power of what I call creative restlessness. In my laboratory, we found that the most innovative periods weren't when we were calmly following plans. They were when our internal fire was raging, when we couldn't rest until we solved the problem, when we couldn't sleep until we found the answer. Remember this. The person who needs to be pushed will never achieve their full potential. But the person driven by internal fire has to be held back. When I was developing the storage battery, there were times when my assistants had to remind me to eat, to rest, to take basic care of myself. Not because I was forcing myself to work, but because the fire inside made stopping feel impossible. Here's another secret about internal fire. It's contagious. When we were working on improving the telegraph, my team's drive wasn't fueled by orders or deadlines. It was fueled by exposure to that relentless internal flame that made excellence the only acceptable outcome. So let me ask you, what feeds your fire? What makes stopping impossible for you? What drives you beyond rational limits, beyond comfortable boundaries, beyond acceptable standards? This isn't about what you should do. It's about what you can't not do. Let me give you a practical technique for sustaining your internal fire. Create what I call a possibility journal, a record not of what you've achieved, but of what you see as possible. When the flame seems to flicker, when the drive seems to dim, return to these possibilities. Let them reignite your fire. Here's what most people never learn about lasting achievement. It's not about maintaining motivation. It's about protecting and feeding that internal fire that makes extraordinary achievement inevitable. When I faced technical challenges that seemed impossible, when progress seemed permanently stalled, when others suggested accepting limitations, the fire inside made surrender impossible. Your fire isn't just a tool, it's your essence. It's not just what drives you, it's what defines you. It's not just how you work, it's why you work. Remember, the world isn't changed by people who do what they should. It's changed by people who do what they must, driven by a fire inside that makes stopping impossible. Every achievement isn't just a destination, it's fuel for the flame. Every success isn't just a completion, it's a launch pad for what's next. Because in the end, it's not about reaching goals, it's about maintaining that internal fire that makes excellence inevitable, innovation continuous, and limitations temporary. The fire isn't just how you achieve, it's why you achieve. Don't let it die. Don't let it dim. Don't let it flicker. Feed it, focus it, follow it. Because that fire inside you, it's not just your drive, it's your destiny, and as long as it burns, anything is possible.